Alice in Borderland is a captivating Netflix live-action series mixing multiple elements including sci-fi, mystery, and the survival genre. In this video, we'll explore how the series creates appealing standout characters through the use of contrast in their objectives and core needs. When we're thinking about creating characters, we might entertain diving into their psychology to investigate what each character truly wants out of life. We ask, what's driving them? Or what are they desperately searching for to fill a deep need in their core being? Since the characters in Alice in Borderland are placed in extreme circumstances, the choices they make reveal instinctual needs that cause conflict with each other. As usual, there will be spoilers for the story for Alice in Borderland, so I recommend checking out the first 2 seasons before proceeding further. The series starts off by following a young man named Arisu and his 2 friends, Karube and Chota, who find themselves in an abandoned Tokyo after a strange apocalyptic event. Soon, they're thrown into a series of life and death games, all established with time limits, specific rules, and outcomes that hint at leading to an eventual release from this bizarre world. Arisu is the true protagonist of the series, and he's later joined by Usagi, a mountain climber, and a host of other characters including the calculating Chishiya, the mysterious An, the villainous Noragi, the endearing Kuena, plus the Hatter, Aguni, Akane, and others. Throughout the series, there are visual motifs referencing Alice in Wonderland and the presence of playing cards like diamonds, hearts, and clubs that are baked into the mechanics of the game world. The pacing and tone are well done. I often found myself wondering what was going to happen next, as Arisu and his friends scrambled to survive from one game to the next. Since the game world is shrouded in mystery, as a viewer, I constantly try to figure out what was happening, much in the same way that Arisu and his friends were doing. So perspective-wise, this was a great aesthetic choice by the storytellers, as we're moving through this world and seeing it through Arisu's eyes. The show's violence is very graphic, and that should be taken into consideration when approaching the series. I think the story reveals the darker side of human nature and what different individuals will do when faced with survival and sacrifice, as well as wrestling with their own sense of purpose and self-worth. Under these extreme circumstances, where the high stakes of life and death are at play, it's understandable that characters are moving in and out of working together or pursuing their own agendas, while subverting the plans of others. Juxtaposed against these dark events, the characters of Alice in Borderland truly shine because many of them surpass our initial expectations of them. While the mechanics of the game scenarios are thrilling, I think the way the characters in the series are crafted makes the story memorable, because each character has unique traits and intriguing internal contradictions that make them very human to us. 2 characters we'll look at are Arisu and Chishiya. The main protagonist, Arisu, is initially portrayed as an aimless young man who hasn't lived up to his potential or the expectations of his family. At first, he might come off as forgettable and pathetic, but over the course of the series, Arisu reveals a deep sense of hope and a will to live that also at times seems shattered in his worst moments. His arc is a huge emotional roller coaster that has very high highs and very low lows. He experiences so many losses, from losing his friends Karube and Chota during the hide-and-seek game, to losing another friend, the car mechanic Tata, during the Osmosis game versus the King of Clubs, to the final showdown against the Queen of Hearts, Mira, where she twists his mind to a breaking point. In the finale, he's barely hanging on until Usagi shakes him out of his hallucination. Arisu's series objective, i.e. the spine, could be to survive this weird game world and get back to the real world. And I think the contrast of Arisu appearing to be a weak, aimless character combined with his deep optimistic strength when he's at his best moments makes him appealing. I was reminded of Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, when the elven Galadriel tells him that even the smallest person can make an impact on the world. To dig deeper into Arisu's character, we can ask, what does he want out of life? Maybe Arisu wants to know his purpose and to believe that his life has meaning. Or even more, perhaps he wants to find out what makes his life worth living. If he starts off as an aimless character at the beginning, he's forced into situations within the game world where he can't be aimless. He has to take action in order to survive. In real life, Arisu hides away from further responsibilities, and he shies away from being challenged. It's possible that this is a defense mechanism to protect himself from getting hurt or from losing something. So maybe one way to interpret Arisu as a character is that his overall series objective is a deep need to find what makes his life worth living. Within the game world, Arisu's need is funneled into the goal of surviving the games. When Karube and Chota are killed in the hide-and-seek game, Arisu aims to make it to the end to find out who did this to his friends, and when he faces off against Mira, the Queen of Hearts, we see him struggling to finish the game when the Queen starts to unravel his mind, providing various explanations of what is really happening in the game world. Arisu is devastated at several points when he loses a sense of what his purpose and meaning is. An interesting aesthetic choice that could have been made in the acting is that Arisu is afraid of fully living out his optimism, which is his strength, since it motivates others. He's rarely openly optimistic in the real world, but in the game world he's able to access this strength at several points. This strength would lead him to his primary overall objective, to figure out what makes his life worth living. But the internal conflict comes from his fear of accessing that strength, so he is his own worst enemy. He could be afraid that it might undo him, that he wouldn't be able to control it. So a secondary conflicting objective could be Arisu's self-defeating need to keep his optimism at a distance. The second character we'll look at is Chishiya. When we first see him, Chishiya comes off as a cold, calculating, and aloof character. He's often a few steps ahead of everyone else, and he always seems to be in control of his emotions and the situation. He's a consummate game player who uses his intelligence and seemingly calm resolve to maneuver and outwit his opponents. But Chishiya is more complicated than our initial impressions of him. In the second season, we learned that he was a medical student who was forced to deprioritize some of his patients in favor of richer, more influential patients on organ donor lists, so his patients would die as a result. We see that Chishiya is morally conflicted with this order from his supervisor at first. Over time, he adapts to the situation and leans into his cold, calm persona to stomach executing the orders from his supervisor. It's almost as if he has to put on a mask to get the job done. Looking closer at Chishiya's backstory, it's possible that one of his greatest fears is to lose control of himself and the situation. When we think of the actor's approach, perhaps an acting choice was made here about Chishiya's series objective. Maybe the thing that drives Chishiya the most is that he never wants to lose control of himself, so his overall objective is to prevent real emotional fear from overtaking him. That acting choice would make for an interesting contrast. One of the most calm and collected characters has a deep need to not let fear overtake him. In his backstory, Chishiya could have let his moral discomfort guide his words and actions toward a supervisor when he was asked to deprioritize his patients on the donor list, but he doesn't. Perhaps he has to suppress this moral discomfort and his emotions in order to work within the corrupt medical system of his hospital. When he's in the game world, Chishiya navigates the games in similar ways. He controls his emotions in order to assess the situation, and then executes his plans to win the games. Where this makes Chishiya vulnerable in the game world is his relationship with others. A cold, calculating character can use other players in a manipulative way, and Chishiya takes those actions when he sets up Arisu at the beach in order to steal the real playing cards from the Hatter's safe. But Chishiya later throws himself in front of the King of Spades' gunfire in order to save Usagi's life. His ongoing friendship with Kuena also humanizes him, even if there are shades of manipulation and self-interest in their relationship. Overall, both Arisu and Chishiya from Alice in Borderland shine in ways that last long after the final episode is done. They become human to us because they are relatable through their flaws and internal contradictions.